Good evening, everyone. How are you? I'm Shane McCord, Superintendent of Gilbert Public Schools, and this is Bonnie Betts, our Associate Superintendent of Business Services, and we welcome you to our very first road show for the 2023 Bond and Override Factual Information Session for Gilbert Public Schools. What we'll do tonight is we will go through the slideshow. I'm using a microphone tonight because this is being recorded. This will be posted on our website after this evening, and so just to let you know that that recording will happen. So we'll start off with tonight. We'll talk in three different areas. The first area is our 15% override continuation. We'll talk about the need, the history of the override, as well as the taxpayer impact. We'll talk about the $100 million bond, the need for that, and the taxpayer impact with sustainable bond programs. And then lastly, we'll talk about the combined override and bond and the total tax impact of those two, and the tax rate comparison to our peers. First off, the need for the 15% budget override continuation. This contributes to the district's priorities specified in our strategic operating plan, and there's basically three areas. We want to attract and retain our highest quality teachers and staff. We want to maintain student and staff safety and security by continuing to employ mental health counselors, social workers, and campus security personnel. And lastly, we want to maintain our $2 million allocation for class size reduction. If you'll look, based on the Auditor General's report for 2022, spending by operational area, not error, classroom spending was at 73.5%. If you look here in the middle, it says instruction at 59.6%. The average of our peers is 57%. So we want to make sure we have as many dollars going to the classroom as we possibly can. Next, looking at the local district spending related to that. Again, you'll notice Gilbert's 73.5% when it comes to dollars in the classroom. And again, dollars for instruction is 59.6. Our peers, Chandler is 72.1% and 58.2% respectively. Higley is at 70.7% and 59.9% dollars instruction. Mesa is at 72.8 as well as 56.7. Queen Creek is at 68.7 with 57% for dollars of instruction, and Scottsdale is 70.7% with 54.1% for dollars of instruction. As you can see, we do extremely well compared to our peers. This is something we're very proud of. When it comes to taxpayer dollars, we want to make sure we utilize those dollars as respectfully as we can, and I think when it comes to our Auditor General's report, we show that respect to our taxpayers. All of the East Valley school districts that surround us have a 15% override to this date. And then again, override capacity, this is done in millions. This is the history of our M&O override. Back in 2010, we had a 10% override. And that continued on, and then we weren't able to sustain that 10% override. The voters didn't approve that continuing. And so those dollars went down by a third for a few years, and then in 2016, we had no override. Then in 2017, once again, the voters supported Gilbert Public Schools with a 10% override, and that continued on. And then we had the opportunity, because the state changed the law on how much we could ask for, went from 10% to 15%. And in 2019, we went out again, and we got a 15% override. We were very thankful for the voters for doing that for us. And here we are today. We're going out a year early for this override because we want to make sure that we're prepared for the future. And we'll continue on with that. 15% override generates about $36 million, or will, for the 23-24 school year. And then this is the 15% continuation tax impact. I'm going to turn it over to Bonnie Betts. She loves talking about this area.
Sure. So this is a residential tax estimate only. So again, we wanted to make sure that it was clear that we are not proposing an increase to the tax rate for community members within Gilbert Public Schools boundaries. So note that if you have a $100,000 assessed value, this is not market value, it's $100,000 of assessed value. The override tax levied in the current year, so we're still under the 15% override in this fiscal year, is $130 annually for that $100,000 homeowner. The $251,560 is the average assessed value for homeowners within the boundaries of Gilbert Public Schools. So on average then, $327 per year is paid to support that. And then for a $500,000 assessed value home, it's $650 per year. But this is the important thing here. Total override tax to be levied in 2024-25 if we are successful in November with getting the budget override continued, it will be exactly the same cost. So a $0 increase associated with this budget override continuation. So bond authorization, back to you, sir.
Thanks, Bonnie. Next, we want to talk about what we will be spending the $100 million bond on. We've broken it down into several categories. First of all, the critical facility upgrades and replacements. Our schools have started to age out in terms of all mechanical type needs, and so these dollars will help fix those areas like HVAC systems, water systems, any kind of structural issue that we may need to address at a campus. Career and technical education, extracurricular spaces, we've allotted $9 million for. Safety and security, looking at securing entryways, fencing, and alarms, $12 million. Technology infrastructure, intra and inter school communications equipment, allocated $12 million for that. And student transportation, buses, vans, equipment, $4 million, which totals $100 million. Equipment amounts are subject to a 5-year amortization period. And so, again, these are the needs that we will be spending the $100 million on. This is how we've addressed it in the pamphlet. And so we are bound to spend it on these types of things related to those areas. Again, this is just a pie chart related to that in terms of percentages. Based on $100 million, 63% to the facility upgrades, critical facility upgrades and replacements, as well as $12 million for safety and security, $9 million for career and technical education, another $12 million for technology infrastructure, and $4 million for, or 4% for student transportation. Bonnie.
So this slide, many of you know that we did engage in a master capital planning process during the last fiscal year. We started last summer, and we've just completed that process. We assessed all of our buildings, determined exactly what the condition was in all of our buildings, and based upon all that work, this shows the total need in Gilbert Public Schools facilities for the next 30 years. But what's most important is where we are today. So if you could hit the clicker one more time. So our backlog today is $198 million. A couple of things about that. That was during the last fiscal year, so we have not input all the data regarding all of the work that we've done over the summer. So we have put in about $30 million that would arguably reduce that backlog. And the other important thing is that $198 million is not prioritized. So it includes all of our grounds, it includes exterior, interior paint, any items that's related to our facilities. So when we were determining the ask that we wanted to come forward with our taxpayer, we thought we've been consistent. We did $98 million in 2015, requested $100 million in 2019. So we want to honor our taxpayer, and so we're asking for another $100 million for this go around. So the $100 million tax impact again. So here again is the total tax levied in 2024 for these. This is residential again only. And this is what's going to be on the pamphlet, which is why we're sharing it here, so we have an opportunity to explain it to you now. The pamphlet's going to say, here's your existing debt service, which is 73.5 cents per $100 of assessed value. And then the new bond debt service is going to be an additional 30.5 cents. But those two things together still equal $104. So $104 from $104 is still a $0 tax increase. I recognize that that's difficult to believe. How can you get another $100 million and not impact the tax rate? So if you can give me the next slide. So our long-term strategy is, remember that we have outstanding debt today that we are paying off between $24 and $27 million of that debt annually. In Gilbert, this has been historical, at least for the last 15 years, that our debt has been amortized over a very short period of time, so we are paying it off quickly. So what that does is, as we're paying off old debt, we're actually filling in that payoff with new debt, keeping the tax rate flat over time. And so to show you a graph of that, I think it's on the next slide, yeah. So you can see, here's our existing debt service. So that's where these blue bars are, the existing debt service. So, and you can see over time where the existing debt service is coming down. So the black bar at the top up there, that's the bonds that we just sold in May. So you can see that they're increasing the debt slightly over time. And then you see the red bar up there, that is the new Series A for this new bond authority, presuming that we would be successful in November. And you can see where it just fills in the debt service over time. But you can see the tax rate stays flat and continues to decrease over time. So the concept is we're continuing to pay off debt, and we can fill in that paid off debt with new debt, keeping the tax rate flat. In all fairness, if we didn't have the approval, our tax rate would go down by 30.5 cents per $100 of assessed value. So our taxpayers would definitely be saving money over time without the new debt. So that's the caveat. In addition, and we're not anticipating this, the assessed value in Gilbert has continued to increase. If we ever had a significant downturn like we did in 2008, where the assessed values dropped, that would be a circumstance in which we'd still have an obligation to make our debt service payments on our existing debt, where it's possible that we would have a slight increase in the tax rate. But that's unlikely at this point in time, and it helps us because we're amortizing our debt or paying it off over 7 to 8 years, so we're paying it off quickly. So that's the explanation on that. So now the combined question, how do we look when we're looking at both the M&O override continuation along with the bond debt service? What's going to happen then? Well, here's where we are in 2024. This is what we're levying today. This is what we would levy in 2025. And you can see that with the two combined, there is a $0 tax impact for our taxpayers. And then this is the commercial cost. So just a heads up on the commercial. So keep in mind that the assessment ratio for residential is 10%. So residential has a discount, so to speak, in terms of their contribution to school tax. Commercial property has an assessment ratio of 17%, which accounts for the dollar increases, so it's a little bit higher. But again, with existing override and existing and new debt, new bond authority with the 15% override is exactly the same. Again, a $0 tax increase for our commercial property as well. And then this is just showing the history of our assessed value growth here in Gilbert Public Schools. You can see that this is the most current information. We are still growing in assessed value the other benefit to our taxpayers. So the assessed value per statute for residential is only allowed to increase 5%, but we're at 5.3%. So what that means is we've got 0.3% of intrinsic growth. We're adding new property to the rolls, which spreads out that dollar amount to more people and more taxpayers, which has a positive impact on those that have continued to pay taxes over time. The next slide. Just again, repeating that, this is our tax rate trend. We have continued to bring that tax rate down. You can see here we had a bump up. This is the 21 school year, which was the first time we received the 15% override. From that time, it continues to go down. So we've been committed to managing that tax rate. And then finally, if we compare ourselves to and they're not exactly our peer districts, they're our East Valley districts. They're the districts that we compete for personnel. We have the lowest tax rate of anyone in the East Valley today, and so that will stay the same again, even with this 15% override continuation and the request for an additional $100 million of bond authority.